Hey guys, what is going on? It is Brook, or the Undead DM. I'm back at it again with another rant for you today. Unfortunately, I don't have any gameplay footage to share with you all, as I'm currently in the car. So hopefully the audio is a little bit better on this one. I hope to get a microphone in a little bit, trying to become a little bit more professional with this, so to speak. But with that, let's just get right into it. So, I was watching some older videos, roughly around 2 to 3 years ago, by the Dungeon Coach. If you guys don't know who that is, he's a D&D YouTuber. He makes a bunch of homebrew. He has his own website. Yada yada yada. I will link his channel in the description below if you want to check him out. He's got some pretty good stuff in there. Some things I don't agree with, some things I do. I purchased a lot of his stuff personally. It seems like he does understand the idea of what optimization is and how people think when it comes to being an optimized build. But there are a lot of things that confuse me. Primarily, let's focus today on weapons. That's where the rant initially started. So, why I think weapons in 5th edition and in a lot of other editions are kind of boring and don't really do much outside of deal damage. So, in 5th edition, the problem stems that weapons are pretty one note outside of magic items. So, a flame tongue sword is a little bit more exciting than a normal sword, but all a flame tongue does is give you additional fire damage. That's really it. And then you get some of the higher tier items which have charges that you can use, but even then, they just give you spells or kind of the same abilities as a flame tongue, where they just make you deal additional damage. But now, instead of just getting that additional damage for free, you have to spend charges to do it, with no real upside. Like, for instance, a piece of homebrew item, a homebrew item that I gave to one of my players, specifically my girlfriend in another campaign. She has a set of plate mail that, while being worn, because she's a paladin, if she were to ever take damage, she could expend a charge, and she essentially gets a free smite on her next hit. But it also adds her paladin level. So you're still expending a resource, and you're getting the damage, but now there's a condition tied to it. Which I think is a good way of balancing 5th edition. Kind of like, not a risk and reward, but more of a balancing act. You gotta give it, there's give and take. If you make something cost something, then you have to give it something else in return to kind of balance it out. That's why action spells are typically pretty strong. Bonus action spells, for the most part, aren't that impactful unless you're talking about the smite spells. Then those could be pretty impactful depending on who you're fighting. But even then, on a paladin, a melee class with concentration-based spells, not that good of a choice. But I digress. Magic items seem to be the standard practice in 5th edition, and there's not really much improvement on the base weapons that you can get outside of getting +1, +2, +3. That's about it. But Dungeon Coach, he created an entire PDF homebrew where he talked about how weapons are boring and how he wished they did other things. And so he created this PDF, and the PDF's whole purpose is to give basic weapons more things to do, and they're more unique. So in this PDF, he talks about how slashing weapons, if they critically hit, they leave a bleed effect. If an axe critically hits, it does something, I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what it is, but they do something or another. And then hammers, or hammer-like weapons, whenever they critically strike, you can either push the target 5 feet away or knock them prone. So basically, he's taking the Tasha's Cauldron feats for... Oh, I remember now. It was between slashing, piercing, and bludgeoning weapons. I apologize. So, slashing weapons, whenever they crit, they get a bleed effect. So they take an additional d4 damage every turn, or I think every round, because the way he's trying to describe it makes it sound like he means once a round, but not once per turn. Otherwise, that would mean that he's essentially taking in an 8 creature initiative count with 4 players and 4 enemies. He's essentially taking 8 ticks of damage. So I assume he means once per round, but I digress. Slashing weapons get a bleed. Slashing weapons get a bleed. Piercing weapons, they get an impale effect, which I believe makes it so that they have disadvantage on the next d20 roll, or they have a penalty to the next d20 roll. And then hammers or bludgeoning weapons can either knock a creature prone or push them 5 feet. So he's essentially giving them the Crusher, the Piercer, and the Slasher feats from Tasha's Cauldron on basic weapons. Now, where I finally drew the line was in another video he made in a follow-up where he didn't talk about ranged weapons. He solely talked about melee weapons in the first video. In the second video, he goes over the ranged weapons. This is where this rant came from. He talked about why is it that things like longbows and short bows, as well as crossbows, do the same damage. It's like, why does a short bow deal a d6 and a longbow deal a d8, and then you got the hand crossbow, which does a d6, and then the light crossbow, which does a d8. The only difference is, now we have a heavy crossbow that does a d10. So, here's what his solution was. He said that it is a heavy weapon, that a crossbow is a heavier to wield weapon. I do agree with this. It is a lot sturdier of wood. It has a lot sturdier of a construction. It's a lot more moving parts, so to speak. And the body has to be able to stand up to a shorter string and a lot thicker string and be able to fire at a relatively quicker pace, I would say. But here's where we disagree. So, Dungeon Coach, he says that what he did to fix this issue is he made each crossbow, as far as I'm aware, each crossbow, because he only went over the difference between a longbow and a light crossbow. And what he did is that he took a longbow and allowed them to just fire, 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 fire. He did this over the course of 2 rounds. He said that if a person is dealing 2 attacks and they're wielding a longbow, they'll be dealing a d8 plus their dexterity modifier, and in the example he used +5. So that's d8 plus 5 4 times. But what he did with the light crossbow is he reduced the die size by 1, but increased the die count by 1. So he reduced the light crossbow from a d8 to 2d6. But he added the caveat where it no longer has the loading property. It is now, apologize if you guys can hear that in the background, that's a truck backing up, but he made the crossbow have the reload mechanic instead of the ammunition mechanic or the loading mechanic, because he felt that the loading mechanic was too clunky, and that it was, if you loaded a weapon and you fired it, you can only fire it the once, and you had to load it, but it assumed that you already loaded it each turn, so it was a little bit weird. So what he did is he changed it to have the reload property, and the reload property in his version requires you to fire a shot, and in order to reload the weapon, you either have to expend an attack action, or one of your attacks if you have extra attack, or a bonus action to reload. And he says he did the math on this, and he said that if you have a character wielding a longbow over the course of 2 rounds, it will deal 38 damage. that is factually incorrect unless he is assuming maximum damage and it always hitting, which I'm pretty sure he does do to make the weapons look better. But if you want an accurate representation of what it is, what you do is, I did the math on this, and if I can put it into another video, specifically homebrew math, I'll release that a little bit later when I have time. But the problem is that, assuming you have 2 attacks, in one turn, you have to fire, reload as a bonus action, fire again, and then in the video he states, now your crossbow is unloaded. So at the start of your next turn, you have to decide if you want to sacrifice an attack action in order to reload it, or you want to use a bonus action to reload it. And no matter what, it's a bad option, because you're sacrificing damage regardless of what option you choose. So go back to the first example. The longbow person, if they have 2 attacks, they can just go bam, bam, that's it. And then they can free up their bonus action to do whatever they want. But the person wielding any crossbow, they now have to use their attack action. They attack once, and now they have to decide, do I want to reload with my bonus action, or do I want to use my other attack action to reload and then do nothing with my bonus action, or something else that doesn't matter? Maybe even use crossbow expert, who knows? But if you choose the bonus action, like I'm going to be doing for this, you lose, because you attack, you reload your bonus action, you attack again, but now your crossbow is unloaded. Turn 2 comes around, longbow guy, he shoots twice, no problems. But now crossbow guy, he has to make a decision. He can either load as one of his actions and lose out on an attack and have his bonus action to do whatever, or he uses his bonus action to reload and then still only get 1 attack, because again, you have to reload at the start of your turn because your weapon isn't loaded. So now you just bonus action, reload, fire your first attack, and now you have a second attack you can't do anything with, because presumably you're playing ranged. You can't grapple a target, you can't shove a target, you can't knock a target prone, you can't use the help action, it requires your whole action. So now you have a second attack you can't do anything with because your crossbow's not loaded. Well, then just weapon swap. Yeah, you could weapon swap. You could. But in this assumption, he's assuming that you're going to reload. So this way, your shot is loaded for your next turn. So now you've only hit once. And I did the math on this. He said that they're incredibly close, where the D8 from the longbow hitting 4 times, because there's no way he's calculating this for just 2 different hits. There's no way you're getting 38 damage in 2 hits. There's no way. If you did the math correctly, you would have, on average, 24.7 damage versus 23.4 damage. So the crossbow is dealing 1.3 damage, 1.3 or 1.4 damage less than the bow. This is mathematically correct. And this is theoretically a good balance, because now you're dealing the same damage, if not slightly less. But then let me ask you, as a player, as somebody who likes to use these weapons myself, I mean, crossbows, the main thing I play in Monster Hunter. I like range, I like melee. So as a player, is it fun to essentially lose one of your damage attacks, to reload a weapon? Meanwhile, you could have just picked another weapon and done the same thing. The purpose is that they be somewhat even. That's why the loading and reload properties are separated. That's why the reload property is solely for the firearms and the DMG. And that's why the loading property exists for the crossbows. This way they can deal the same damage. Now, with this mechanic, you are essentially giving up damage to be slightly, if ever so slightly, worse than a bow. So you're relatively correct. You would still be staying in the same range, but you've got to remember one thing. You're still losing an attack 50% of the time. Because this is just 2 attacks. If you're playing a fighter and you get 3 attacks at level 11, then you can fire, reload bonus action, fire, and then reload with your 3rd attack action, and then on your next turn, you fire, bonus action reload, fire, and then 3rd action reload again. So by the time you get to level 11, which is basically close to the end of the game right there, you have now gotten the same amount of damage, if not slightly more, than a longbow person is getting a whole 6 levels earlier. And not to mention, they're getting that extra attack too. So they can just attack 3 times, and now they possibly outscale you. I haven't done the full math on it. Like I said, that'll be in another homebrew math video. But it boggles my mind that this is the solution that he came up with. Now, this is no attack against Dungeon Coach, but it's such a strange mechanic. Why would you want to punish your players by implementing a mechanic that does less, if not the same amount, as a bow? It adds nothing. It doesn't take away anything. You could easily just remove it and it would be the same if it doesn't do anything, because the math doesn't lie. If it's the same no matter what, you could just make it deal less damage. You could just make the bows and all the crossbows just deal more damage, or keep the bows somewhere around where they are now, and then just make other crossbows harder to use, like requiring a strength score. Like, why isn't there a heavy bow? Like, there's short bow, long bow. Why isn't there like a war bow that does D10 damage? Why isn't that a thing? I don't know. But just, it blows my mind that this is what he came up with. And I honestly, I'll have to think of a fix myself. As like I said, my system's kind of been put on ice until I can get some 4th edition. Maybe I'll look to 4th edition to see what he can do there. But that's just my little rant.